Welcome to another sociology class, and remember we are doing introduction to sociology, right? Welcome. Let us pause a prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the participants in this course. Ask your blessings upon them. I pray, Lord, to bless me and cover me with your blood and your presence. Ask your blood coverage upon the system now engaged to make this course possible. In the precious name I pray, amen. Now, we have been looking at sociological sociological we're looking at sociological macro sociology and sociological imagination, which according to Professor Pollan, all sociologists, whether they're concerned with macro sociology or micro sociology, I remember earlier on we looked at 4 perspectives of sociology: micro, meso, macro, and global perspectives. Now, but the 2 most popular perspectives are micro and macro. And I have been making the point that there should be a divergence between the 2 perspectives because both of them are interdependent. That's from my perspective. And Professor Pollan has made the same observation. And here is where he has come up with what is called the sociological imagination or the sociological lens through which all sociologists view social reality. View social reality through the same lens. So it is called sociological lens or sociological imagination. Now we are going to be looking at sociologists' view of society. All sociologists are interested in the experiences of individuals and how those experiences are shaped by interactions with social groups and society as a whole. We all have experiences. Sorry. These experiences are born out of certain actions. Actions such as our interactions with social groups, maybe a church group. And in the church is a group, but in that group you have a number of subgroups. You have the ladies group, you have the men's group, you have the Sunday school, you have the, and so on and so on and so on. And each will, there is a general culture for the church, but each group is going to have a subculture. And so on, and you'll have people who don't love you, and some you don't love, and some with whom you don't get on well, and so on. And society as a whole. To a sociologist, the personal decisions an individual makes do not exist in a vacuum. You don't make decisions in a vacuum, even though you might think so. If you're making, this is my decision, I'm making my own decision, I'm doing this, and this is how I feel. Cultural patterns and social forces put pressure on people to select one choice over another. You make a decision and you're not even aware of the factors that are caused him to make that decision. Sociologists try to identify these general patterns by examining the behavior of large groups of people living in the same society and experiencing the same societal pressures. How do they react under the same kind of pressure? People do react differently. Some people commit suicide, some give up on life and live on the streets. You call them street people. Some fight back. Some, and so on. People react differently. Understanding the relationship between the individual and society is one of the most difficult sociological problems, however. So we are not looking at sociological imagination allows all sociologists to do this. Good. Whether you belong to the macro perspective or the micro perspective, you are looking through the same lens. Now, sociologists the world over are concerned with the effect of one's reaction or one's interaction with society as a whole. Part of this is because of the reified way these two terms are used in everyday speech. Reified. And reified is from the word reification. So there's a reified way these two terms are used, the society and the individual, in everyday speech. Reification refers to the way in which abstract concepts, abstract meaning not something solid, this is that abstract. Abstract is something that you can't hold. It's real, but you can't touch it, you can't hold it. It is real. Complex processes or mutable social relationships. Mutable, same relationship, goes both ways. Come to be thought of as things. Complex processes and mutual relationships come to be thought of as things. A prime example of this is when people say society causes an individual to do something or to turn out in a particular way. And people blame society and people's behavior all the time. Not knowing that, yes, society does have an effect on the individual. But the individual has certain mechanism, inborn mechanism. And these mechanisms or compartments or abilities or what senses or whatever term you prefer should enable the individual to think, not just to act, and to reason. But what are the effects society is having on the individual, and also the effects the individual is having on society? All sociologists are concerned with that. A prime example of this is when people say that society caused an individual to do something or to turn out in a particular way. In writing essays, first-year sociology students sometimes refer to society as a cause of social behavior or as an entity. First year, because as you get deeper in it, your perspective will have changed. So that's why I say first year. First year. So they refer to first year students, sociology students, sometimes refer to society as a cause of social behavior or as an entity with independent agency. On the other hand, the individual is a being that seems solid, tangible, and independent of anything going on outside of that skin sack that contains its essence. And independent of anything going on outside of the skin. Is not in it. Is the individual fully independent of whatever is going on in the world around him? These are the issues that sociologists the world over seek to grapple with. This conventional distinction between society and the individual is a product of reification, insofar as both society and the individual appear as independent objects. A concept of the individual and a concept of society have been given the status of real, substantial, independent objects. Alright? There are two independent objects now. As we will see in the chapters to come, society and the individual are neither objects nor are they independent of one another. An individual is inconceivable without the relationships to others that define his or her internal subjective life and his or her external socially defined roles. So the individual is being impacted on by those around him, and society as a whole, the police officers, or the laws of the land, and so on, and there is some relationship with the individual and other individuals, or the individual and the group, or the individual and certain institutions. And these effects help to define the individual's internal subjective life. Because we have a subjective part to us. We are not just objective. We are not just objects, and we are always objective. We do have subjective, the way I feel. I'm feeling so depressed. That is subjective. But you can't tell me I'm not feeling depressed. You can say to me, what do you think are the causes? And I begin to reason, and I might say, I did an exam, and I just feel as if I have failed it. And then you can say to me, no man, don't put your mind on it. And even if you have failed, you'll get another opportunity to do it over, to sit it over, and so on. But you can't tell me that I'm not feeling depressed. And that is subjective. And the effect of the individual and me, or the institutions around me, the effects that they have on me will no doubt influence how I make decisions and the roles I seek to play in society. The problem for sociologists is that these concepts of the individual and society and the relationship between them are thought of in terms of established by a very common moral framework in modern democratic societies. Read it again. The problem for sociologists is that these concepts of the individual and society and the relationship between them are thought of in terms of established by a very common moral framework in modern democratic societies, namely that of individual responsibility and individual choice. Often in this framework, any suggestion that an individual's behavior needs to be understood in terms of that person's social context is dismissed as letting the individual off of taking personal responsibility for their actions. And both are really no, because I often um, speak out against or reject the view that the individual who commits a crime is helpless because he commits the crime because of his background, because of his social context, because he does know better, because his father brutalized him, because I often dismiss that. But there is a nexus between that individual's experiences, earlier experiences, and his actions. I grew up in a church, and it can be said I'm a product of the church. It doesn't mean that the church, the teaching of the church has been 100% successful in my life. But it has shaped me and the choices I make and the decisions I make through my life, up to this point. I can't be, and as a result, when I see certain lifestyle out there, they get to me. And I often wonder why people live like that and behave like that and talk like that. I often wonder. Because, you know, I just consider those behaviors wrong. Why? My upbringing. Because of my upbringing. I consider those behaviors wrong and evil. Certain behaviors. What would you say if I were to tell you that I have never used an expletive in my entire life? I grew up in a context where they were used. But they were not used in my home. And my mother wasn't a Christian in a Christian sense of the word, but she was very, very religious. And her mother could use them. Her mother used to use them. But again, she grew up in a church. And although, because of circumstances, she was not, say, a member of a church. But she had this deep fear of God. She had that. She became a Christian a year after I did. I became a Christian when I was in primary school. And she became a Christian a year after. And when I say became a Christian, I mean that she professed to have accepted Christ as her Savior, got baptized, and started going to church on a regular basis and became active in church. Talking about society is akin to being morally soft or lenient. Sociology, as a social science, remains neutral on these type of moral questions. The conceptualization of the society, and society is much more complex. The conceptualization of the individual, let me retract that. The conceptualization of the individual and society is much more complex. The sociological problem is to be able to see the individual as a thoroughly social being, and yet as a being who has agency and free choice. Individuals are beings who do take on individual responsibilities in their everyday social roles and risk social consequences when they fail to live up to them. And they don't just take on social responsibilities in a vacuum again either, or to play certain social roles and run certain social risks within a vacuum. Society does make certain demands and set certain standards, rights and wrongs, and good manners and bad manners, and what is of good taste and what is not. And if you don't exhibit what society considers good manners or good taste, you're going to find yourself in the minority and ostracized and shunned and so on. People don't want to talk to you. They don't want to be in your company. The manner in which they take on responsibilities, and sometimes the compulsion to do so, are socially defined, however. The sociological problem is to be able to see society as a dimension of experience, characterized by regular and predictable patterns of behavior that exist independently of any specific individual's desires or self-understanding. I read it again. The sociological problem, don't forget that, is to be able to see society as a dimension of experience, characterized by regular and predictable patterns of behavior, predictable, that exist independently of any specific individual's desires or self-understanding. Yet at the same time, a society is nothing but the ongoing social relationships and activities of specific individuals. Because without individuals in what is called society, there will be no society. In 2010, this CBC program, the current, aired a report about several young Aboriginal men who were serving time in prison in Saskatchewan for gang-related activities. They all expressed desires to be able to deal with their drug addiction issues, return to their families, and assume their responsibilities when their sentences were complete. They wanted to have their own places with nice things in them. However, according to the BCC report, CBC report, 80% of the prison population in the Saskatchewan Correctional Center were Aboriginal, and 20% of those were gang members. That is consistent with national statistics on Aboriginal incarceration, which show that in 2010, 2011, the Aboriginal interaction rate was 10 times higher than for the non-Aboriginal population. While Aboriginal people account for about 4% of the Canadian population, in 2013 they made up 23.2% 4% of the federal penitentiary population. So although that their numbers, and we're talking about the Aboriginal people, those who were, like for example, in Jamaica you would say the Tanos, the Arawakan speaking people. If they were alive, they would be Aboriginal, especially if they were alive but refused to get absorbed into the wider society and become like us. So Aboriginal in the sense that they remain in their pre-Columbian state condition. So a large number of them found themselves mixed up in gang-related activities and criminal activities. This is consistent with the national statistics, yes. While Aboriginal people account for 4% of the Canadian population, in 2013 they made up 23.2% of the federal penitentiary population. In 2001, they made up only 17% of the penitentiary population. Aboriginal overrepresentation in prisons has continued to grow substantially. The outcomes of Aboriginal incarceration are also bleak. The Federal Office of the Correctional Investigator summarizes the situation as follows. Aboriginal inmates are routinely classified as higher risk. Higher risk high risk and higher need in categories such as employment, community reintegration, and family support, because they are a risk group. People see them as troublemakers and problematic people. They are not going to get jobs that easily. That's a problem. You would want to employ that female in your house to cook your food. Release later in their sentence, lower parole. Most leave prison at statutory release or warrant expiry dates. Overrepresented in segregation and maximum security populations. Disproportionately involved in use of force, interventions, and incidents of prison self-injury. More likely to return to prison on revocation of parole. Often for administrative reasons, not criminal violations. The federal report notes that the high rate of incarceration of Aboriginal peoples has been linked to systematic discrimination and attitudes based on racial or cultural prejudice, as well as economic and social disadvantage, substance abuse, and intergenerational loss. Intergenerational loss. That's something that can be done about that. The intergenerational loss. So they have been discriminated against, and it is bad when the discrimination is based on race or cultural prejudice, as well as economic and social disadvantage. They suffer those economic and social disadvantage. Substance abuse. We're going to break here because if I take on a new point, it is going to drag me on. So it is best for me to break here and pick up I fill out a report. Do your reflection and email me. God bless you.